It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher.
My personality is I want to win badly. I want to win more Lombardis for Philadelphia and our fans. We got the greatest fans around, and I will do everything possible.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. The latest podcast came out this morning. Q&A, Jason Avant, Quentin Michael, they're talking wide receivers, which is very convenient because this is a very interesting week for wide receivers. Talked about it earlier on the show. There's a lot of receivers in free agency who are available. We'll talk about that with Geoff Mosher coming up here in just a second here on Football at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN, being brought to you by Dr. Lyle M. Back. For everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery, go to iloveLyleBack.com or call 856-MAKEOVER for Dr. Lyle M. Back, proud sponsor of Football at 4. And here he is, live in virtual color. It is Geoff Mosher here on the screen, here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, here on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff, how you doing on this Hump Day Wednesday?
I'm great, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, and I feel like, you know, what Avant and Michael were talking about on the pod that dropped this morning, I mean, they had so much good stuff in there, and I don't want to give it all away because I want people to actually go there and listen to it because I don't think I can do some of it justice, but I find it very interesting that the day that came out, that pod comes down. What else comes out? Well, look at all these wide receivers who are free agents who didn't get tagged, guys like Kenny Golladay and Juju Smith-Schuster. And I want to know from you, Geoff, what do you think the wide receiver world is going to look like? Because we are living in a world right now where you have a bunch of studs available in the drafts, but you have some interesting names out there. Could some of the teams who might be interested in receivers go and get some guys in free agency, leaving some guys available in the draft? And how could that impact the Eagles at 6? Geoff back on the line, I believe, now on the phone. Geoff, can you hear me?
Yes, Josh, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. So I want you to pick up. You were talking about the Lions, right? You were talking about the Lions and them picking basically to draft a wide receiver, it looks like, over paying Kenny Golladay.
That's correct. And so that's what the Lions are choosing to do in this salary cap controlled world where the cap went down. So they have a chance to get probably a more explosive wide receiver. Kenny Golladay has been a big play wide receiver, but he doesn't run like a Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith. So they have a chance to open it up there a little bit by getting one of those players, if that's the direction they go. The Steelers, what they do, Josh, is different, and I think what they do should be modeled by a lot of teams. And maybe some teams do and try and just don't do it as well as the Steelers, but nobody drafts wide receivers better than them. But if you'll notice, the Steelers draft wide receivers every year, right? I mean, they had some pretty good wide receivers when they had Juju Smith-Schuster, and I'm trying to think, Deontay Johnson, of course, right, who's emerging into one of the better wide receivers in the league. And they still took Chase Claypool last year in the second round. So when everybody always talks about, no, you need this, you need that, the Steelers don't draft on need. They draft the best football players that fit the identity that they're looking for. That's why I always kind of yell at people and snipe at people when you say, oh, the Eagles shouldn't draft this guy. They don't need it. It's not what the draft is about. The draft is about finding the best collection of football players every year, because when you do that and take best players instead of need players, you wind up having a team that can compensate for your holes by having Pro Bowlers and really good players in other areas. So obviously they're not going to pay Schuster. I bet you they'll be fine with Claypool, Deontay Johnson, the other kid from Oklahoma State, whose name is James Washington,
yep.
And Claypool. And I'm sure they'll probably wind up drafting some guy in the third, fourth, or fifth round that becomes pretty good too.
Now, with all that being said, look, if you have two teams that are saying we're going to move on from receivers, I'm assuming there's going to be teams who do the opposite as well. Emmanuel Sanders is out there. You know, Eagle fans, they're saying, like, can the Eagles get any of these guys? And realistically, it's going to come down to how much can they get under the cap before the start of the year, right, Geoff? A lot of this has to do with how far do they get under the cap determines what they can do in free agency.
Yes, it's funny, Josh, because I've been asked today a couple of times, will the Eagles get under the cap? As if they have a choice. They have no choice. They will get under the cap because it's mandatory. You're not allowed to be over the cap. So they will be under the cap by hook or crook. And of course, Josh, they'll not only be under the cap by compliance, but they'll also be under the cap enough so that they can bring in some free agents. They have to. They can't not bring in a free agent. They have one quarterback right now on the team, on the entire 53, who's under contract, and that's Jalen Hurts. So they're going to need a veteran backup at the quarterback position. I think that they'd be wise to try to sign a one-year veteran linebacker like they tried to do last year with Jatavis Brown, who then retired on them and left them in a tough spot. Outside cornerback, if Maddox is going to play the slot, I don't know what their plans are right now. They can certainly draft corners in this draft, but you still need someone with a little bit of veteran presence there to play that position. So they're going to have to shave off more money than just the whatever they are away from being compliant right now to be able to make some moves. But those are the kind of moves that they're going to make. 1-year deals, nothing spectacular, the B and C level free agent stuff, not the A level.
So, like, for example, does a guy like T.Y. Hilton, who was in Indianapolis with Nick Sirianni, does he fit into maybe that category?
But I just don't see how. T.Y. Hilton to me is a guy who's good enough to probably get a multi-year deal. Now, I know he's battled a lot of injuries, and he's not 22 anymore. So it's very possible that a team is going to give him a multi-year deal, but it's really a 1-year deal that has some money on it in year 2 and year 3 if he lives up, doesn't get cut after year 1. But there's going to be teams that have more money to play around with. It's funny because the Colts are one of those teams, but they're deciding to move on, and they do have to give some money to Darius Leonard and some other of their in-house guys within this year and next year. So I think T.Y. Hilton will still get a decent contract on the free agent market that will be better than what the Eagles can offer. But we'll see.
Geoff Mosher joining us here, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, the latest edition. Jason Avant, Quentin Michael, Q&A on the Inside the Birds podcasting network. Big part of what you guys are doing now is bringing in these guys. You guys had the offensive linemen during the season, Trey Thomas, Todd Herremans, and Jamal Jackson during the season. Now you got, Avant and Michael, and they made some amazing points about these wide receivers. And I want to give it all away, but first of all, if anybody hasn't listened to the podcast yet, just the story about Jeremy Maclin is a must listen, okay? If you have listen for nothing else, it's the Maclin story. But aside from that, I love what they were saying about Jalen Reagor because, Geoff, you're on social media. There's still the Eagle fan out there who screams and yells about Justin Jefferson. And one of the things that they mentioned about Reagor is Reagor has that dog in him, and he hates being compared. Justin Jefferson's going to make him work harder. Now, as a football guy, I say I love hearing that. I love hearing that this guy is that competitive. And I think that what Avant said on the podcast about Reagor are all a lot of positives that basically make people understand this guy has a ton of potential. And even though people love Justin Jefferson now, then maybe 10 years from now, they're going to love Jalen Reagor even more potentially.
Yeah. Things obviously have to go right with the offense, with the protection, with the quarterback. But what Jason Avant was trying to convey mostly was that Jalen Reagor is wired correctly from a competitive standpoint. Look at how he came back from the injury. Look at how he got injured in the first place in training camp, the first injury. He was making a tackle after the quarterback got intercepted. So he's wired right. And more importantly, what Jason was saying was that Jalen Reagor has the speed, the twitchiness, the explosion. Everything is there. Everything is on the table for Jalen Reagor to be a successful wide receiver. You talked about the comparisons to Jeremy Maclin, and I'll let the people listen to the show to get a real understanding. But the bottom line is Jalen Reagor playing in the Big 12 did not see the type of coverages, did not see the type of physicality that you see in the NFL. And when you see that, you have to respond to it. You have to prepare for it. You have to have a better understanding of everything in your route concept from start to finish. That was a little bit difficult for him this year because of the injuries, right? It put him back, and obviously because of the dysfunction of the offense. So I'm not taking all of that off Jalen. I think that Jalen himself also needs to mature in a way that Jason described Jeremy Macklin's process as well. But if people, and I know they are, and doing the whole Justin Jefferson comparison, if people are worried that this was a miss on skill set, they are wrong. It was not. I mean, I've spoke to multiple teams last year around this time. Jalen Reagor was considered that mid to low first round, early second round, just depending on what you're looking for out of a wide receiver. I'm not saying that the Eagles couldn't have used Justin Jefferson. Obviously, they could have. I do think Justin Jefferson in the Eagles offense last year probably wouldn't have been as good as Justin Jefferson was in the Vikings offense this past year. But I just urge people to kind of hold out hope. I understand sometimes you can see it, Josh, and the J.J. Arcega-Whiteside breakdown on the show with Q&A explains exactly everything that's gone on to why he's not successful in the NFL. And they leave you with the idea that you can understand if and when he never makes it in this league. But the tone on Jalen Reagor is completely different for them.
Yeah, and if I just go back to Justin Jefferson for a minute, I talked about this earlier in the show. Jefferson had 100, I think it was 124, 125 targets this past year. Greg Ward had 79 targets to lead the team. There is no mathematical, conceptual, logistical way that Jefferson's having the same impact on the Eagles that he had on the Vikings team, where literally they just took Jefferson and said, hey, Stephon Diggs used to be here. You're basically taking his targets. I feel like people don't want to accept that reality that the Eagles offense just didn't play well last year, Geoff.
Yeah, so I will not say, because we'll never know, that if you flipped positions, would Jalen Reagor had gone to Minnesota, if he had gone there, would he have had a 1,400-yard year, broken records, been as amazing as Justin Jefferson? I have no idea. Can't tell you that. But I can tell you that you're absolutely right to say that one person was in a way better scenario, environment, stable offense, and saw a whole lot more targets, whereas the other guy was hurt twice, so missed a lot of time. And as you just mentioned, came into a very dysfunctional offense, was not even the number one or number two target. So it's really very, very difficult to compare their seasons because the context just is not anywhere the same.
Geoff, the other guy I wanted to get in touch with you about was they mentioned on the pod about Fulgham, and they said something that you and Adam talked about during the season, and Avant and Michael drove home in this podcast, which is that Fulgham, he was having a good year, and that the Eagles basically stunted his development in forcing Jeffrey back into the lineup. And I felt that the way they described it was very interesting because they were saying, look, if you're a young guy and you're getting these opportunities and all of a sudden it's been taken away from you, how would you react? And I felt like that's a very poignant way to put it, which is it's not just on the Eagles offense, it's on the player. This is a young player and you literally just pulled the rug out from under him because of Alshon.
Right. And that was what Adam and I felt during the season was a mistake. Still feel it's a mistake. Not only is it a mistake because you took the momentum away from a young wide receiver, but it was a mistake in kind of understanding exactly who Travis Fulgham is and how he's wired a little bit. If they had done their homework, they would have known, because Adam reported it during the year, that one of the reasons that the Lions kind of moved on from him wasn't because that, they were just so stocked at wide receiver, which they were, but also that they felt that Travis had some growing up to do. He's certainly not a bad kid. He's a really good kid, but he is a kid from a different kind of background. As most people know his story now, he grew up overseas. He played other sports. I mean, he was traveling to different countries, Africa and other areas. And, it's not like a kid who grows up in, Texas, right, or California or Ohio and is ingrained in that football culture and Pop Warner from the day he was born. So Travis is just kind of a little bit newer to football and what it's like to just devote your entire being and existence to football the way some kids are from a very early age. And the Lions, recognize that a little bit. He had a little cup of coffee there with the Packers. And then he came here and he clearly, a light came on for him. But as fast as that light could come on, it went off. And the team's the team's want and desire to put Alshon Jeffrey on the field just because, and I think the money dictates a lot of that, and I think that's why we can have a discussion about some of these veterans that they're restructured and pushing money down the road to, and what that's going to mean for the next year or two. But once Alshon came back and Travis then had a little bit of adversity because teams were, game planning him for him now, they kind of lost him. So that's on the coaches. That's also on Travis. So I'm not going to say that, he doesn't need to get a little bit mentally tougher and really understand that this is a hobby, this is a lifestyle, and you got to devote every single second of your practice to getting better. But the Eagles should have recognized that a little bit. And I think that Jason's absolutely right. I mean, it's something that you're right, Josh. Adam and I questioned it this season, and having Jason, who was with the team all year, say that makes me feel like we were correct on that assessment.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Q&A is the new pod that dropped this morning. Adam Kaplan, Geoff Mosher dropping tomorrow morning on the Inside the Birds podcasting network. Football at 4 here every day on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff, you mentioned the contracts. I want to get into that with you as well. Obviously, the news came out this morning that the salary cap is going to be just over $182 million. It's still a roughly $16 million decrease from what it was last year. And I got to say, if we add up all the numbers between the release of Hester and Countess and the restructure of Kelsey and Darius Slay and the expected restructure of other guys and the release of Zach Ertz, once you start adding up those numbers, Geoff, it really sounds like the Eagles are really not that far off in their budget than they would have been if the league didn't have the windfall of money that they did due to a pandemic, because $16 million is a lot of money in the grand scheme of things.
It is in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm sorry. Your point was if the cap had been normal, then they'd be in an all right position.
They would have been in a better position. $16 million is a huge swing there.
It's a big swing. I would say it'd been a big part of helping them become compliant. And maybe you would get to keep a guy like Malik Jackson. Maybe you wouldn't feel as pressured to get rid of Zach Ertz, or you might even be willing to kind of have a second chance at a new deal or money with him like that. But now it just becomes untenable. So you are a little bit weaker at some of these positions now because you have to move on from these guys where normally you might have kept it. And then of course you had to do all these restructures. So, you look at like Darius Slay, who's coming off an okay year. He's pretty good. I mean, and he obviously struggled against Metcalf, and he obviously struggled against Devontae Adams and Claypool. But he's also going to be, 31, not this year, but the following year. And he's going to be, because of the restructure, over $20 million on the cap. So what if he gets hurt this year, like Alshon did at the end of 2019? If he gets hurt, starting to get 30, you're going to probably want to move on, especially if you draft corner, but you can, because all the money that you've kicked down the road is going to drain into your cap. And everybody says, but the cap's going up, Okay, well, it's still not a great idea to have to take that sizable of a cap hit. And I'm just talking about one guy. They've had 4 other guys, whether, that they've restructured, like Brandon Graham, who you never know. Father time could catch up with them, and injury could catch up with them. And the worst case scenario would be all these guys kind of have rough years or get hurt, and it's tough to trade or move on with. It's tough to move on with them because of the cap hit you would take by getting rid of 1 or 2 or 3 of these guys in the same year.
Now, with all that being said, Geoff, how much money do you think, maybe not a specific number, but maybe conceptually, what is reasonable to think that the Eagles are going to have after they get cap compliant? Because obviously they're not going to have a ton of money, like, for example, the Colts do, but they're obviously going to have some money to make moves because you have to have some money to do things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. It's hard to say. It doesn't have to. It depends on how they want to structure the contract for certain people. They can certainly do a deal where there's very little money in year 1, right, and then year 2 and year 3, the numbers are a lot bigger. Say they bring in a back. Although I still think that they're going to be more in the market for one-year veterans than they are going to be anybody for long term. But even if you want a 1-year veteran, if you want to be able to pay him, you may have to sign him to a 3-year deal just to spread that money out. And the year 2 and year 3 are basically like almost dummy years,
Listen, you guys talk a lot about those dummy years on the Inside the Birds podcast about how that affects the budgeting, basically. I mean, look at Dak Prescott's deal. It's technically a 6-year deal, but the final 2 years are completely dummy years. And I think that gets overlooked sometimes. that these contracts, Jeff,
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of financial gymnastics that goes into this stuff that, no offense to someone like me, I'm not sitting there reading the contract, so it's not that I see these numbers and I'm like, wait, what? How? And you got to go back and reread the information 200 times.
Yeah, hey, I've gotten a kick out of some of the responses I've gotten from some Eagles fans about how I'd much rather be the Eagles than the Cowboys have to pay $40 million a year to Dak Prescott and then have that back end stuff. And yet they're the same fans who are saying it's okay to have all these old guys restructured because the cap's getting bigger. So if the cap's getting bigger for the Eagles, it's also getting bigger for the Cowboys, right? And every other team. So the $40 million that sounds so cringeworthy for people is, theoretically, quote unquote, not so bad because the cap's going to go crazy and go up. So I don't understand how you can look at one thing and use the cap as an example of why it's good and the other as a cap why it's bad.
Oh, you know why it is, because people pick and choose who they want to point to. One day someone's the boogeyman, the next day he's a hero.
Well, it's kind of like the column I wrote about Jeffrey Lurie the other day, where some people really love the fact that he's involved because they want Jalen Hurts to be the quarterback of the future, not because it's the right thing to do, but that's because of what they want. But, let Jeffrey Lurie let it leak that he's involved with a draft pick that they don't like, and all of a sudden it's a bad thing. You can't have it both ways.
People want to have their cake and eat it too. Geoff Mosher, you're powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Q&A is the pod that dropped this morning, I should say. Jason Avant, Quentin Michael, getting very deep into the wide receivers. You must listen to it. It is great content, great information. And then tomorrow, Jeff, you and Adam will drop your next pod. You want to give us a little preview, a little tip of that?
Yeah, we have some, we're going to get into Jalen Hurts' situation a little bit based on, what we know now. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the cap, further moves that they can make. We have some we may have some information on certain receivers or players in this offseason who are, trying to get better. And I've got some information on the quarterback wide receiver workouts that are going to be starting soon down in Texas.
I like hearing that. There you go. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. it drops. Kaplan and Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast. And he joins us every Monday and Wednesday here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. As all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline. Jeff, always appreciate you jumping on and working through the technical stuff.
Great talking to you, Josh. Apologies for the technical stuff. Not sure if it's your side, my side, doesn't matter. We were able to get this thing in, and it was smooth.
Where there's a will, there's a way, Jeff.
That's right. See you later.
Take care. Geoff Mosher joined us for Football at 4. Of course, Football at 4 each day on the Sports Bash being brought to you by Dr. Lyle M. Back for everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery. Go to ilovelyle.back.com or call 856-MAKEOVER for Dr. Lyle M. Back, proud sponsor of Football at 4.